Thank you to all the attendees. My name is Anthony Vaccaro. I'm the president of the Northern Miner Group. We're an outfit that has not only media with the Northern Miner, mining.com and CMJ, but also data, education, and career development solutions. So an event such as the LIAMforum is something near and dear to our hearts. And we hope that we can help out in any small way along this important theme of today. All right, let me set this up a little bit. I'm going to set it up by starting out by saying a simple truism, which is that the world needs more mining. The world just doesn't necessarily know it yet. Okay, like we know this. To further the evolution of civilization, we need a lot more metal to do that. That is a simple, undeniable fact. We need more metal to generate, to conduct, and to store electricity. If we think of something like the Paris Climate Agreement, where it aims to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius, how are we actually going to get there? These are nice words, these are nice goals, but the practical implementation of policies and procedures and how we're going to live as a global community, there's a lot of questions, right? We need more solar, we need more wind power, we need more EVs. We take out just that last piece, just to make it concrete for people. Just look at EVs. How much metal is needed to replace combustion engines? It's a staggering figure. Let's just take the US alone to make it a little bit even more concrete, and so our minds we can wrap our heads around a little bit. To electrify vehicles in the US alone, we're talking one country, albeit a very big one, it will take an increase in 20 to 50 times, depending on the specific metal, of metal production compared to what was being consumed in 2020. 20 to 50 times, not double, not triple, not 10 times. 20, I say it again for effect, because I don't want people to just get lost in the numbers. Think about this, 20 to 50 times. It is staggering, and it points to a historic moment, but also an opportunity, right? If we're serious about lowering carbon, if we're serious about curbing climate change, and we should be, it's not about just saying pretty words and then feeling good about ourselves for saying it, right? It's about getting down and dirty and understanding where we're going to get the metals that we need to achieve these lofty goals. The bottom line is we don't currently know where that supply of metal is going to come from. And connected to that, and just as concerning, we aren't attracting enough people to help us find it and produce it. So listen, on the mining side, mining industry is on the right side of history. So if you want a career that's going to directly help society evolve into a lower carbon future, you don't have to look any further. And I think that is pretty purposeful. But that's just me. Let's turn to an expert. One of my favorite orators in our industry, an individual with a clear eye on what's coming, while at the same time having a firm grip on the steps we need to take to meet our future challenges. That would be George Hemingway. He is managing partner and he leads the innovation practice at Stratalis, where he advises the leaders of companies, organizations, and countries on the future and how to succeed in these uncertain times. Through his work, he has collaborated with the world's leading industrial and mining companies, ranging from Vale to Teck, BHP to BASF, to set their future visions and reimagine what is possible and transform their businesses, especially in the most challenging areas, such as GHG reduction, tailings, safer mines of the future, and the like. George is considered one of the leading futurists in the industry, and his work has won numerous awards, including SME's Robert E. Murray Innovation Award. He's delivered over 100 keynotes at global forums ranging from NASA to the World Mining Congress. In addition to corporate boards, he's passionate about supporting the next generations of leaders as a board member to the Chamber Orchestra of New York, Moonmark Aerospace, and Lassonde Institute of Mining at the University of Toronto. He holds an MBA from Columbia Business School and a BS from the Stern School of Business at NYU. George, wonderful to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Anthony. Good to see you again, and a real honor and pleasure to be here today at such a fine forum in honor of such a young man and what his father has done to put this together, and really happy to talk about the power of purpose and what is possible when we really focus on the future. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for attending today, and thank you again very much for having me to the forum to speak on the power of purpose. I want to talk a little bit today and start with a very simple question. Why are you here? Are you here because you have to be? Or are you here because you want to be? And if nobody was looking, would you still be here? Today, I want to talk to you about your why and the power of understanding that and the power of purpose and why our role is so critical in helping the mining industry to transform in the most uncertain of times, and how our own personal quest for meaning could mean the difference in the mining industry's quest to transform. It's an interesting question, this why. We often think about what we do. It's almost a critical component of when we meet people, we tell them what we do, but we rarely ever speak about why we do things. And yet why really is at the core of our DNA. And it's remarkable how difficult it can be for us to share something as deeply personal, and yet how critical it is in doing so. It's interesting for me personally, when I think about my why, I'm kind of operating on a little bit of a career crisis, a COVID career crisis. I've spent the last 22 years trying to become an expert in uncertainty. In the last 2 years, pretty much everybody else has caught up with me. And it's easy to understand, well, why? I mean, look at the world we live in. It's an uncertain place. We've got the Great Resignation. We've got increasing debt and inflation. We've got waves upon waves of, well, I don't even want to say it anymore. And now we even have the specter of war. It's a tough world. Our friends become our enemies, and our enemies become our friends, and then they become our enemies again. And throughout all of this, there's so little we can really rely on. I mean, even man's best friend can't be relied upon anymore as a source of inspiration and security. At some point, we were vaccinating zoo animals. Depending on where you live, being a zoo animal is about as good as healthcare gets. But the one thing that always kind of gives me a little bit of comfort is, as human beings, how resilient we really are. If you think about it, a year ago, we were just wondering, what are we going to do with our lives? How are we going to get out of this? And now we're kind of back to bickering about the same things we always bickered about. Politics, and whether or not we are and aren't in a recession, and whether a loaf of bread is going to cost $115 or $150 this time next year, or the war in the Ukraine, or how to convince people to get out of their pajamas and come back into the office with or without their pajamas. And what we found in our work at Stratalis is this. In the times of greatest uncertainty, people tend to react in the most, predictable of ways. About half the world tends to gravitate to the things that give them a sense of comfort, a tradition, religion, family. And then the other half tend to rise up and assert control in another way, to find some way to really rally against some kind of injustice. Now, we've seen that the last few years, whether it's Occupy Wall Street, or whether it's Black Lives Matter, or people storming the Capitol, or protesting against the 1% and billionaires or industries. We've seen that people rise up and they're deeply uncomfortable, and that kind of function is not going to go away just because COVID went away. It's going to come into a play in the future, and it's going to make a big difference for big industries and mining as well in a real way. Now, we work a lot outside of not just mining. As Anthony mentioned, we work in other industrials. So let's take a look at another example. Let's look at aviation. Now, aviation is an industry that's under fire, and for a long time, they didn't even realize it. It started with the Boeing 737 MAX, right? That came down, a couple of crashes, lots of deaths, and then COVID happened. And we realized we didn't have to fly as much. And at the same time, we realized that, you know what? Aviation is a huge source of pollution and GHGs, something which isn't helped, by billionaires taking joyrides into the stratospheres as the new enemy of state and going off and sort of spewing even more GHGs and disconnecting from what we felt was a sense of reality for us. At the same time, while things are now getting better for the airline industry, believe it or not, things seem to be getting worse for the rest of us. If at all possible, we've got more and more canceled flights. We've got rising costs. We've got more and more discontent with the industry inside and outside of it. And what's interesting about all of this is that it's a lose-lose situation for the airline industry. If they make money, we hate them because they do a terrible job. And if they lose money, well, we've got no one left to hate. It's all seemingly disconnected, but what it is and why it's relevant, I guess, for the natural resources industry is this. Just like mining, the aviation industry is coming under social pressure, and people inside the industry are clinging to the past. They're doing their best to resist, and it's all going to add up to a problem down the line very soon as the industry needs to transform. Any way you look at it, whether you see the parallels between aviation or mining or not. What is clear is this. Society is unhappy. Something feels wrong in their gut, and they are taking their discontent and they are putting it into action. They're looking for answers or scapegoats, and one way or another, they will find them. Big industries like aviation, like pharmaceutical, like finance, are very much still under fire. So here's a question. What do you do in a world in which everything is seen and anything that can be seen can be canceled? Now take my friend over here, Kermit the Frog. Kermit's had a rough couple of years, just like me, what with the COVID-15, and I myself have suffered from the COVID-25, but not as rough as his ex-girlfriend. Yes, you, who couldn't take no for an answer, or this guy who couldn't take no for an answer, or these guys who've had a very bad, no good last couple of days, weeks, months, years. Now, a while ago, Facebook and its brethren, WhatsApp and Instagram, went down for like 6 hours, and everyone went around in a panic and was like, oh my God, the internet is breaking. So they went to Twitter to let everybody know. And of course, the internet wasn't breaking, and Facebook came back. But at the same time, a whistleblower showed up at Congress and said, you know what? Facebook's a terrible place. They're bad for democracy. They're bad for our youth. And people started to say, hey, maybe it would be better if it didn't come back. Now, of course, it did come back, but what's important here is that folks are trying to cancel Facebook. And they're trying to do that because, let's face it, we don't trust them. It started with Cambridge Analytica, and there have been a bunch of other things that kept going with it. And maybe we don't need them either. And Facebook knows this. I mean, that's why they went ahead and canceled themselves. But the thing is this, you could cancel Facebook, sure, but can you cancel mining? Now, I'm going to agree with the groupthink on this. You can't cancel mining, at least not yet. But you can cancel miners, and you can make it a very unprofitable and very unpleasant place to do business. As with mining, the internet had a lot protecting it. I mean, we needed Facebook for a while. Politicians, generally speaking, can't get together to even tie their own shoes, let alone regulate an entire massive industry. And, well, for the most part, like mining, what went down eventually came back and up, and people really kept buying Facebook stock for a while and kept doing quite well. And just like the mining industry, you know, eventually what goes down comes up. But hidden inside this question about Facebook is a more interesting question. Do we hate Facebook? Or do we just hate the internet and all the ugliness that's on it right now? Do we hate mining society? Or do we just hate the coal companies? Or do we just hate the bad actors? Now, if you're a Facebook, you don't get the pleasure, or a Google or an Amazon, you don't get the pleasure of ignoring what society as a whole thinks about the internet. And if you are a well-behaved, well-acting, proper mining company, you don't get the luxury of being able to ignore how society feels about the industry as a whole. A rising tide lifts all ships, but a sinking tide brings them all down at the same time. Now, one of the challenges for the mining industry is that, unlike, say, a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon, where you can kind of bundle them together and say, well, they all kind of do the same thing, there isn't even one mining industry to speak as a single voice. I mean, let's face it, oil sands and diamonds have precious little in common. The same could be said for potash and lithium. And the base metals miners, at least many of them, do their best to make sure that we don't pay attention to the fact that many of them were in the thermal coal business until recently. And the folks in gold, well, they play an entirely different game altogether. The one thing that unifies them all is that society lumps them all together as folks that take stuff out of the ground, which they do. And because of that, the industry can't really speak with a single voice. And to be honest, a lot of the industry wouldn't want to speak with a single voice, because the strategy for many is, and it's a good strategy for any one company, to separate yourself from the other companies by drawing a thin green line. But as such, any one mining company faces a Facebook problem. You see, mining is critical to transforming the world. And Facebook, like most mining companies, wants to go ahead and buy new companies and grow. And mining companies want to have social license and permission to grow. And to do that, they need society to trust them. They need regulators to trust them. They need to be able to go out and take actions in a way that allows their business to grow. And that's why the natural resources industry is doing its best to inject itself into conversations. But society isn't always open to listening to them, as we see what happened to the CEO of Shell when he tried it last year. Now, unlike Facebook, there really isn't a WhatsApp or a Twitter to go to if mining went down. And the challenge for all of us is that mining really is integral to us being able to transform as a society. If you think about it, the world is trying to reduce its GHGs. It's trying to make an impact on global warming. And at the same time that we are trying to do all of that, we're going to need to bring in more and more minerals from the ground. We're going to need to be able to mine faster and faster while the population grows. And we're going to need to be able to transform. The industry has set some very, very bold targets for 2030 and beyond. And in order to make those targets happen, it's either going to have to make some very tough choices. Tough choices related to capital expenditure, tough choices related to labor, tough choices related to transformation. And somewhere along the line, what mining industry needs to do to transform, and what mining industry will be able to transform, is going to require something more than just money and action. If society doesn't trust the mining industry and understand its purpose or recognize how interconnected it is to global success, it risks being derailed. Well, just like Facebook. Now, the key to all of this is trust. Trust is the new competitive advantage. A couple of years ago, Stratalis did a study that looked at what the leading CEOs and leaders of mining companies thought was the most critical component when it came to transforming over the next 3 years. And 3 things came at the top, and I have to admit, we missed COVID altogether. So much for being futurists, right? But what we did discover is this. All of the things that really mattered to CEOs, that they believe were going to matter to the future, dealt with society and society's ability and willingness to trust mining companies, whether that had to do with social license or responsible sourcing or the environment. Trust was the competitive advantage that they sought the most. Now, the big showstoppers that impact trust kind of always come out to us from left field. They keep changing, which is why we keep paying attention to different things, and stories keep changing around what matters to the mining industry every few years. About 10 years ago, we were really focused on mechanization, automation, robotics, and people were afraid that robots were going to take their jobs and we would all be out of jobs. And look, it didn't happen. And part of the reason for that is that we always underestimate the amount of time it takes for technology to actually mature and overestimate the time it takes for it to be adopted, which is why this didn't happen, but it's just about to. And when it does, there's going to need to be trust around for us to transform. But while we're over there paying attention to the robots and all that stuff, a tailings dam, or 2, or 3, or 4. So while people are paying attention to what's going to happen, challenges happen to the industry. What protects you when these unknown, uncertain showstoppers show up? Well, it's whatever trust quilt you've built around you and your industry in order to change the world. So whether we're talking about challenges of tailings, or GHGs, or water, the industry needs to focus on building this quilt, this blanket of trust around itself in order to protect itself. Now, the thing is this. The biggest mining companies know this. At their most senior executive board level, they know this in their hearts. And that's why a lot of the big players are out there doing the right thing. They're messaging, they're advertising, they're talking about the good they do. But the challenge is that's not going to be enough to move the dial quickly enough on trust. This is stuff that's good with governments, it's good with regulators, occasionally it's good to help you recruit people, but it's not enough to fundamentally quickly change what society thinks about you. That's going to take a different kind of movement. Now, the common and obvious place to look is to look at other people and other industries that do this well. And the popular versions of this, building trust, are Apple and Tesla. These are companies that have managed to take something that was essentially a commodity, right? Like cell phones or cars, and make it not just protect their brands, but make it seem almost virtuous, as if they were doing something good for society at the same time. And what they've managed to do somewhat effectively is draw a thin green line between themselves and all the metals and minerals that they need. Because let's face it, these are industries that need metals and minerals almost more than anything else. And so they've got this wonderful brand halo, even despite this guy. And what they're trying to do, again, is separate us in the mining industry, in society's eyes, from what they do. So much so that Apple went ahead and invented a whole new different kind of aluminum so you wouldn't confuse it, with the stuff that comes out of the ground. Now, there are some parts of mining that are easier to do this with other. Rare earths, battery metals, lithium, nickel, copper, right? These are the things that society tends to think it needs in order to transform. Now, you could argue that, yes, the folks at Resolution Copper may not have made an effective argument to my dad that his Tesla is going to need them in 2035. But if they tried, it wouldn't be as much of a stretch. But the truth is that at the end of the day, it's not as much of a stretch because it appeals to you in a personal way. And that's essentially a critical component of trust. Companies that manage to get us to trust them, like Apple or Tesla, appeal to us because it's not them communicating the message. It's us. There are no greater advocates for a Tesla than you, your friends, and your neighbors. That's something that hits you on a deeply personal level. Some things just don't seem, well, authentic. American poutine, gas station sushi, companies asking you to trust them. Trust comes from somewhere else. Authenticity is built in a way that is real and personal and moving. Authenticity comes from sharing a shared purpose. And purpose doesn't come from an industry. Purpose comes from the heart. Look, mining is way more important than cars and cell phones. It's one of the integral things that drives how our world runs. It's like agriculture and food, or like medicine. If you're a farmer, you know you don't just grow corn, you feed the world. If you're in nursing, you know you don't just heal, you don't just deliver drugs, you heal and cure. And this halo of what you do, it's something that affects everyone in the industry, from the person in procurement that makes sure that fertilizer is there for the farmer to grow, to the person in finance that makes sure that the syringes are paid for the nurse to heal. It's something that people genuinely carry with them when they go to work. They understand the importance not just of what they do, but why they do it. And they communicate it to others. Ironically, the place the mining industry should probably look to discover how to communicate in this authentic, purposeful way is not outside mining, but inside mining. And one of the greatest sources in the last few years, and perhaps one of the continued sources of uncertainty in the mining industry, tailings. Now, if you have looked at the folks that work in tailings, and we have in the last few years, we've helped to build the technology vision and roadmaps across many, many mining companies in areas like tailings, you notice something different than you might have noticed, say, 10 years ago. The people that work in tailings operate at a slightly different level than they had before. These are folks that have a purpose. They understand that what they do matters. They don't just investigate dams. They protect communities. They protect lives. They understand that what they do matters so much, and why they do it matters even more, that I would submit to you, these are folks that are willing to stand up and do the right thing no matter what resistance they face. Because it matters, because they matter. And do you know what that passion and that ability to communicate and that purpose does? It breeds trust. So the person who works reducing GHGs in a mining company, that's a connection they can make, right? They're out there helping to save the world. The person that's working in tailings, they're helping to protect communities. The person that's working in seismicity, they're helping to save operators' lives. But how about the person in procurement? The person that's out there making sure that oil is paid for. Do they understand how what they do is helping the world and why what they do matters? Or how about the person working in digital that's building the app that brings the scoop that tells you when the the ore is at the ore pass. Do they understand how what they do matters and how they are helping to change the world? They couldn't be farther away from what we consider mining traditionally as anyone. It's not a universal truth, but what's interesting is that I think COVID has caused people to take a fresh look at their lives. It's almost as if we're having a global midlife crisis. And that's why we've had the Great Resignation. That's why we've had so many weddings and divorces and people changing jobs and so forth and so on. But here's the thing. If you're in this industry and you stayed in this industry, you have a genuine connection to the good it does for the world. And that's a connection which you may not even think about very much, and you most likely don't commonly communicate it. To put this in the context of sort of modern events, could there be a greater David and Goliath story than what is happening right now in the Ukraine? As many of us did, I listened to Zelensky give that 8-minute speech back in the spring, and I am still very much in awe of the so many exceedingly human ways, some quite surprising, that the world has rallied to his cause. You see, Vladimir Putin is a master of messaging. Here's an individual that some could argue is so good at doing this, that he was able to influence the election of the president of one of the world's great superpowers. And in a message reminiscent of the Second World War, he comes to you to tell you that he is here to protect the Ukraine from fascism. He is here to defeat Nazism. He is here to prevent the genocide of the Russian people within Ukraine. And he's doing so by making sure there are free and fair referendums so that he is in support of freedom. And if all of that doesn't convince you why, he has right and God on his side. On the other end of the ring, you have a former comedian and a former heavyweight boxer as mayor of its largest city. The Russian media machine and might has worked for years to convince us all to simply let them roll over the Ukraine. But here is what Zelensky did. You know, just a while ago, when this all started, the United States offered him the opportunity to build a government in exile. And he said no. He did this because this is a man who knows his purpose. He knows what matters to him. He knows his why. The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride. And then he went again and didn't just tell us about his purpose, but he went again and he refuted the well-crafted Russian narrative with a much more human, emotionally authentic message of his home. Why would I attack my own people? Why would I attack my friends? Why would I attack the people that I grew up with? This isn't genocide. This is me protecting not just me, but connecting it to what matters to the rest of the world. Protecting us, because if he goes down, we're next. A man who has taken his purpose and his why and connected it in a convincing and authentic and human way, and then communicated to us why it matters. And even more importantly than that, convinced others to share their stories as well. Because it's important that a president speaks to us, but much more important as human beings that we listen to the words of people that connect with us, whether that is a grandmother going to fight to protect her country, or whether that is a president reminding us that we shouldn't just be telling stories about why the Ukraine matters, but his people should also be connecting everything they do to what truly matters to them and sharing their own personal purposes in a way to bring the world along for the ride. And the results? The Germans, who, let's face it, are absolutely dependent on Russian oil, just like the rest of Europe is, went ahead and canceled the Nord Stream pipeline, cut off funds from Russia, and then, in a move that was unprecedented, send ammunition into an active war zone, something they said they would never do. The Norwegians and the Finns folks that managed to survive the entire Soviet Empire without joining NATO, then decide that, you know what, now seems like a good time, went ahead and applied almost instantly. The United States sending weapons to a fight that you could argue really has nothing to do with the US. And through all of this, Vladimir Putin, his well-crafted narrative, years in the making, is at a point where he has nothing left to do but rattle a nuclear saber and hope that it matters. But there is something that is far more powerful than the threat of any nuclear weapon. It is a quilt of countries united behind a shared purpose, one to prevent the unthinkable. And in the might of this, even the strongest country and the strongest weapon will eventually fall. How do you fight a Goliath with 1,000,000 Davids? The message here for the mining industry is clear. We are facing a wave of change, a wave of societal pressure, one in which 1,000,000 Davids are needed. And those 1,000,000 Davids start with us. Your why is the key to transforming the mining industry. So I would ask everyone that's listening today to pause for just a minute, genuinely, and just think, what is my why? Why do I get up in the morning? Why do I work in the mining industry? More importantly, why does my why matter to others? Why does my why matter to a grandmother down the street or kids playing in a yard? Why does my why matter to a fisherman on the East Coast? What is the one thing that you would be able to say to a total stranger, authentically, who sat across from you and asked you, why do you work in mining? If you can't find your why, then I urge you to keep looking. And more importantly, I urge you to ask your colleagues, ask your friends, ask other in the industries, what is their why? Why do they work in mining? And then go deeper until you find one that seems authentic to you, that feels like your why, and to ask yourself why that why matters to the world. And then once you have that why, and this is an incredibly important part, tell people. Because you see, a why held within really does no good in transforming society's point of view. Share it, because it is through our narrative, it is through sharing our own personal stories that change happens, that authenticity is driven, that trust is built. Those who tell stories rule society. Now it is our turn to tell our story. Like a comfortable quilt made up of interconnected pieces, sharing our why and sharing our personal story helps to build that protection that the industry needs so much to transform. And so really, it is important that we go out as advocates, not just for ourselves, but for our industry and for the world as it needs to transform and change, and sharing our own personal purposes and why. And so that's really the secret, right? The secret is that we, mining companies, the mining industry, and those that share and understand the message of what we try and do, go out and share our own personal purposes to build trust as advocates for ourselves and for the world that we live in. More than ever, it is not what we do, but why we do it that is the key to transforming, and the key that matters. Because the smallest voices, unified not in a single message, but in a multitude of messages of individual purposes, can build the trust quilt that we need as an industry to transform in the most uncertain of times. More than ever, it is the power of your purpose that matters. Thank you.
Well done, George. We very much appreciate that. We do have an audience question. I know Anthony's back as well. Maybe I'll just read that out for you if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
We have one that says, can we use a circular economy to minimize mining and nature deterioration? Deterioration. There we go. Do you think that's a viable strategy?
I mean, anything that reduces our overall environmental footprint can absolutely help the mining industry to create that quilt of trust that it needs. But I think one of the interesting challenges there, right, is so the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is, in order to create that kind of circular economy, one in which we recycle, one in which we reuse water, one in which we reduce our overall impact, we're going to need the ability to go out there and try new things and transform and invest in things that we don't do today. And well, it's pretty hard to do those things without permission from the communities and the regulators and the customers that eventually become part of that cycle. The more interconnected we are with the world, kind of like the internet, the more everything can be seen. And anything that can be seen, well, could be canceled.
No. Excellent, George. Thank you very much. Really powerful presentation. You had me welling up there at one point when you turned to Ukraine and what's going on, that image of the grandmother with the AK-47. My God. Wild stuff. To the question, I wouldn't mind just chiming in one thing, because I saw some stats on this a few weeks back. I don't remember the exact numbers, but we do have to keep in mind, of course, as George eloquently says, yes, I think everyone in the industry is in favor of circular economy. Of course, we want to reduce waste, we want to reuse what we're having. But when you look at the scale of what George is talking about the amount of minerals that's needed to really decarbonize, there's not enough available just to recycle, right? When you're talking about needing 20 to 50 times more, the stat I saw was along the lines that if we recycled every bit of copper that's in use right now, which is impossible because you're ripping it out of people's hands, right? But if you did do that, and you take these forecasts as being somewhat accurate over the next 10 years, like there's enough there if you recycle all of it for a limited amount of years. I don't remember the exact number, but it's not impressive, right? So there's no way around it, unless, George, you know something, please, by all means, you're the expert here. There's no way around it. We still need to find new deposits, and we need to pull that metal out of the ground, correct?
Absolutely. Or we're going to have to find something other than copper, which we don't have yet. So 100%, Anthony.
Yeah, fabulous. Powerful stuff, George. We thank you so much.